What's up, guys? Greetings from Paris, France. I'm in my hotel room right now. I know this background is not very inspiring, but it's the best angle lighting wise. But let me show you really quickly how cute my hotel room is. They even have like Parisian um, scenery behind the bed. Look at this. Or not scenery, but you know what I mean. Uh, Decorations, I guess you say. A little Parisian setting. Anyway, guys, I haven't done a travel video in so long for obvious reasons, but also not so obvious reasons. I just haven't really been traveling since my mega sort of international travels about a year ago. And then, of course, this year, 2020, there's been the pandemic, which has not only limited, but completely like obstructed the possibility of traveling, right? So the thing is, I am an EU citizen. I have a French passport in addition to an American passport. So the laws are a little different when you are a citizen of, another country. When it comes to this pandemic, there's certain restrictions that don't apply if you're a citizen of a country. So it was a lot of drama to get here. I had to, show up at the airport with negative I had to prove that I had negative results from a coronavirus test, which of course doesn't mean that you just like can't get it in the next few days or like you can't pick it up at the airport. Of course that can happen, but I decided to take the chance. I knew there would be certain headaches along the way with traveling to get here, but I have family here and the flights were cheap, and I realized I could basically be here for a few weeks, mostly for free, just because I have family. I can stay with family here, and it's August right now, and August is the slowest month of the year in Paris because it's just a cultural thing that Parisians, actually French people in general, but especially Parisians, they leave town in August and they go on vacation elsewhere. So August is like the best time if you don't want to be surrounded by tourists and you want cheaper prices for hotels and that kind of thing, or Airbnbs. So it was just kind of a perfect storm. I thought, do I leave or do I not leave? I thought I'm probably going to be confined for multiple more months in Miami in America. So this is the perfect time to see some family, have a cheap flight, and just get out of my, little studio apartment that I've been cooped up in like everybody else for months. So here I am in Paris, France, and of course I thought I had to make a gay dating video here based on my experiences, and I have a lot to share. I even made a little list of things that I wanted to mention because you guys know, if you've been watching my channel for a while, that when I travel, I like to observe. I like to observe like the gay neighborhood if there is one. I like to observe how guys act on apps like dating apps and all that. So I have plenty to share with you guys. So first things first, let me talk about the gay neighborhood in Paris. So the kind of official gay neighborhood of Paris is Le Marais, and it's not just known to be a gay neighborhood. Like there's other communities there. I believe there's also like a big Jewish community there, but it's kind of like recognized as the gay neighborhood of Paris, right? So I have a friend who lives here, a gay friend, who was my friend when I lived in New York City, and now he's back here. So I said, hey, I'm coming to Paris. Could you show me like the gay neighborhood? Can we explore that together? So one night, I think it was a Friday or Saturday night, I met up with him, and we met up for dinner as well. So I was hanging out in that neighborhood, Le Marais, at like 7 or 8 at night. So I was there earlier than just like, the typical hour that people go out to have a drink or whatever. In any city, really. And it's interesting because I was walking around by myself for a while first, and I noticed, once I got there, you kind of know when you're in a gay neighborhood because you see rainbow flags and you just kind of feel it, right? If suddenly there's a lot of men and rainbow flags and symbols of that, you know where you are. And so I started seeing that, and my first impression was that there were a lot of much older gay men. And with gay neighborhoods, I'm used to a vibe where you have like a spectrum of appearances, races, ages, you know, in New York City, in a neighborhood like Hell's Kitchen, well, actually, Hell's Kitchen is kind of more, right now, it's typically more yuppie, like 20s, 30s, 40s. But typically, well, maybe LA is a better example. When I lived in West Hollywood, when I would go out to the bars in West Hollywood, when I would even just walk around West Hollywood, you see guys who are college age, you see like yuppies in their 30s, 40s, and so on, and you also have much older men who have been there for a while, right? And so I was surprised walking around Le Marais in Paris that it seemed like most of the men, the vast majority, were much, much older. I'm talking like 50s, 60s. And I guess for me, as somebody who's much younger than that, it was kind of disappointing to not see more of like a variety of ages of men. But again, like I said, this is the slow month of Paris. So I think it's fair to assume like the busy professionals who have been kind of like desperate to get out of the city for the summer, especially after this pandemic, I think it's very likely that they left town, and the locals who have stayed, maybe they're of a certain age where they would rather just stay home. I don't know if that's actually the reason why, but I thought maybe that was why. The funny thing is, you know, then I kept walking around. I met up with my friend. We had dinner with a few of his friends who are also gay, and they, you know, being local Parisians, they knew where to go. And where we had dinner, which was like a gay bar, but also a restaurant, where we had dinner and the places that we kept going out to, that we kind of like bar hopped around, were actually way more mixed as I expected, in terms of like a spectrum of age and that kind of thing. So my conclusion was, you have to kind of like know where you're going. You know, if you just go to like a gay bar on Google Maps, it might not actually be the spots where the locals know where to go. But also, I figured that perhaps because I went out so much earlier by myself, maybe that wasn't the hour yet that like guys around my age are out in Paris having a drink. So going out bar hopping was fun. What's really interesting about Paris, and I had noticed this before years ago when I came here and visited some gay bars, the gay neighborhood. I don't know if they do this all year round, but at least in the summer, it's very common for people to just be standing outside on the street having a drink, as opposed to being inside in a bar. And I guess coming from America, this is unusual to me, because the only place I've ever seen that in America is New Orleans, where you can walk outside with alcohol. Otherwise, because of laws and, you know, like alcohol licenses and stuff like that, typically you see, if we're talking about a bar setting, people are indoors just about always, with the exception of New Orleans. So it's nice to be outside and enjoy the air. One thing that I kind of always forget, because we're just not as used to it culturally in America, is that so many people smoke in Europe. So the one thing about being outside is, of course, you're surrounded by smokers, and that's like the caveat to being outside. If anyone is curious about the pandemic-related stuff with this, it was kind of weird. That was another reason why so many people wanted to be outside, because then they didn't feel like, you know, it was required to wear a mask. If you went inside to order drinks, for example, to bring them out to your friends, you had to wear a mask inside. But of course, it's like, you know, all this stuff is so hypocritical, because at the end of the day, if you're surrounded by people less than, you know, a lot less than 6 feet away outside, you know, the likelihood of spreading this virus is just, you know, as high as if you're not wearing a mask with people inside, right? So a lot of this is just people following the rules for the sake of following the rules, but at the end of the day, the bar is serving people outside, so they're not really doing anything to prevent this virus from spreading. Anyway, I had a great time with these guys, going around different bars in this neighborhood, and of course, anytime there's a gay neighborhood, the wonderful thing is that you can just like walk from one bar to the next. Everything is close by. It's not like you have to take, you know, public transportation or a cab to go to another gay bar that's, you know, in a whole other part of town. It's always nice when you have this community in one place, and there's an energy and there's a vibe. So now when it comes to the apps, I have a lot to say about the apps. My first impression of the multiple apps that, you know, I had opened and that I checked out is that guys here just seemed so much nicer and more polite. You know, like we've all seen profiles, especially on apps, you know, the more hookup oriented ones like Grindr, where people are so aggressive and judgmental and like already on defense in their profile description. And here you see a lot of like, hey, how about we just like go get a drink? Like, how about we actually, you know, meet up instead of just talking on an app? I saw a lot of those kinds of profiles, a lot of like, hey, let's actually, you know, get to know each other. Let's not just keep swiping for the sake of swiping on this app and seeing how many matches we can collect. Like, let's actually hang out. So it was really refreshing to see, to get an impression of like more substance behind these, you know, these profiles online. But the funny thing is, I matched with a handful of guys my first week or so here, and I guess I set these expectations because of those first impressions. It ended up being the same kind of disappointment as what I'm used to in America, the same kind of bullshit of, you know, you swipe and you match and then it doesn't go anywhere. Like, most of the guys I matched with didn't respond to messages, or they would respond, but it was like pulling teeth. Like, it shouldn't be difficult to carry a conversation. It should be organic. But like, I remember one guy specifically told me he was into me and we're talking, but it was like, he wouldn't ask me anything about myself. I would keep asking him and he'd answer with just a few words. And at a certain point, it just gets kind of like exhausting to deal with that. Like, nobody wants to put in the energy towards somebody who's not like meeting you halfway. So I just kind of was like, all right, I guess, you know, I guess it was a false first impression that I thought people here seem more serious based on how they presented themselves through words in their profiles. So it's funny because it started off that way, and then I left Paris to go visit some family outside of Paris in France. And when I came back to Paris, suddenly I matched with all these guys where it was the opposite situation, where all of them were eager to meet. And of course, with my luck, it was the typical thing where I had like 3 days left in Paris, and suddenly all these guys are like, hey, let's get a drink. Hey, message me, you know, on WhatsApp, like off Tinder, and let's actually like get to know each other. So I'm finishing up my stay now in Paris, and it's bittersweet because I'm talking to some really nice guys, but I'm getting ready to go like very soon. I wish that they had, you know, interacted with me the first week when nobody seemed to like want to chat on Tinder. By the way, there's definitely like an aesthetic here in Paris. I would say that what I see the most of is like a boyish charm, which some people like, some people don't like. I guess what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of like pretty men on these apps, and it's just a matter of whether you're into that or not. It's not even necessarily like feminine, it's just like, again, it's very like a boyish sort of look and aesthetic, like a very youthful look that a lot of guys have. But what's funny is, again, there's so many like chain smokers here that sometimes you see a guy who looks boyish, but he looks a lot older than he should be in a sense as well. It's hard to explain, but it's like they look older and young at the same time. It's just really interesting how different countries you pick up on a certain kind of aesthetic or like phenotype that you keep seeing. And then one fascinating thing is that I opened up the app Jacked here, and me living in Miami, I'm used to it being predominantly like men of color in terms of the demographic. Like, it's mostly black men and Latino men, and I believe that that's very common in the South, specifically in the South in America. In the United States, that a lot of men of color use that app as opposed to like Grindr, let's say. But here in Paris, when I first opened it up, I would say the most dominant racial group that I saw was Asian, like Asian Pacific. So it's just so interesting to think that where I live, I don't think I have seen any Asians on Jacked in terms of like the local grid of who's around you, the first like 100 profiles around you. But here, that's like the predominant presence on, again, just on this app. On the other apps, I didn't feel that there was a dominant group other than just like what we're used to seeing in general on apps, which is mostly white, you know, white people, just because that makes up the largest part of the population. I think it's fascinating how these online communities evolve. So as I said, my first impression specifically with Tinder was that guys seemed more serious and more eager to meet, and then I ended up getting disappointed because of my first week here, but then I did end up actually meeting with guys in real life, and so I think that first impression was actually accurate, that guys here have more of an intent when they're on these apps, as opposed to just wanting to like waste time, you know, kill time on an app and see how many guys they can match with, but like kind of play the game that I'm always used to in America, in cities, which is that it's like a revolving door, you know, like there's so many people, there's so many guys that they kind of like will put you on a back burner while they consider their options. So here, the eagerness that I experience with guys to want to meet me, and not just to meet me for superficial purposes, but like, you know, to have a meal or to get a drink or to get coffee together, it was really refreshing. Of course, I'm aware that there might be a novelty factor with me visiting, right? Like maybe that's not the experience of locals, but it's the experience of people like me who are just, you know, in transit there temporarily. Maybe for some guys there's an appeal to that because they know there's a deadline or an expiration date, or, you know, there might be a little bit of what's the word, exoticization, you know, like you meet somebody from another country, they speak another language, like there's an interest that way. I remember when I went to Brazil, people said that in the comments, that they're probably, the novelty factor of that, being a tourist, being a visitor, is probably why it was so easy for me to talk to guys on these apps and actually get guys to respond and want to meet you in person. So I'm aware that that's a possibility, but it just seemed like the guys that I interacted with had more substance than what I'm used to on apps like Tinder in America. It's also really nice that my experience here is that Parisians are very social. Like you constantly see people out at bars for hours, drinking coffee, drinking wine or beer, smoking, and they really just like the aspect of just conversing for hours on end. And I think that's something that doesn't really exist that way in America. Here, it's a different ambiance when it comes to that. So when it comes to these dates from Tinder, it's so refreshing to meet with somebody who wants to like intellectually, you know, stimulate you and vice versa. So I'm really glad I came here because I think I mentioned this months ago in a video that I had watched Midnight in Paris for the second time during quarantine. And that movie had made me sort of miss like the Parisian charm and just like the fact that it is cultural that in Europe, typically, obviously I'm completely generalizing all of Europe, which is nonsensical, but you do find that it's cultural to like want to engage in deeper conversation, and there's a genuine curiosity about others and an intrigue in others. And I felt that with guys here who I met who, let's say we went to get a drink and then they said, hey, do you want to go for a walk? I'll show you like this part of Paris and then we can get a drink at this other place. And it definitely helps that there's a certain romantic element to Paris, just in terms of the city itself. There's just a charm to the architecture and the design of the city. It's just a very pretty city. To me, it's the most charming city I've ever been to, just literally just superficially, aesthetically speaking. And so to have that as a backdrop when you meet somebody for a drink or for coffee, it definitely, I think, helps to set a certain kind of mood. So I've had a lovely time here. I feel like I've made this video long enough. If you guys have any questions or if there's anything that maybe I missed that you'd love to hear more about when it comes to gay dating in Paris, I'd love to answer it in the comments. Let me know, and I'll catch you next time when I'm back in the States. Bye-bye.